"Mom, don't come to my wedding. I don't need you anymore." The words from my daughter Ashley still echoed in my ears as I held the phone with trembling hands. My daughter, my only daughter, had just spit 28 years of my sacrifice back in my face with the coldness of a stranger. It hadn't been an argument. It hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been an execution. Planned, calculated, and ruthless. I had arrived at her downtown apartment with the dress I had chosen for her wedding, a navy blue dress I'd bought with the money I'd been saving to fix the leaky roof on my house. I rang the doorbell with a smile, also carrying a box of chocolate cupcakes I had stayed up all night baking, her favorite since she was a little girl. I wanted everything to be perfect for the most important day of her life. I wanted to be the mother she deserved, as I had always tried to be. But when she opened the door, her eyes held no warmth, only the chill of a final judgment. Her fiancé, Brandon, was standing behind her, wearing that smug smirk I had learned to hate. And for the first time I understood that I hadn't come for a family visit. I had walked into an ambush. "We need to talk," Ashley said, without inviting me in, without even glancing at the box of cupcakes that was growing heavy in my arms. Her voice sounded different, as if she had rehearsed these words in front of a mirror, as if they weren't really hers. "What's wrong, honey?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though a cold dread was already spreading through my chest. I knew I was about to receive the hardest blow of my life. "I've been thinking a lot, and I think it's better if you don't come to the wedding," she blurted out like someone ripping off a Band-Aid. "Brandon and I have decided we want to start our married life without any drama, without any toxicity. I need space to grow as a person." Toxicity. Drama. The words fell on me like stones. Me, who had worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for her college education at UNC. Me, who had sold my own mother's wedding ring to fund her graphic design degree. Me, who had slept on other people's couches for a month when we lost our house after the 2008 crash, because I preferred she didn't realize just how bad our financial situation was. Toxicity. I repeated, feeling my voice break. "Ashley, I'm your mother. I raised you all by myself. I gave you everything I had, and more than I didn't have." "That's precisely why," Brandon said, stepping forward, placing a possessive hand on my daughter's shoulder. "Ashley needs to free herself from that emotional burden. You've always made her feel guilty for your sacrifices. That's emotional manipulation." Emotional manipulation. There it was. The cheap, pop psychology jargon that had been poisoning my daughter's mind. I immediately recognized the words that came not from Ashley's mouth, but from his. "Ashley," I said, ignoring Brandon completely, my eyes locked on hers. "Look me in the eyes and tell me this is coming from your heart, not from his mouth." But she couldn't. She looked away, down at the floor, at her new expensive shoes, anywhere but at me. In that moment I knew my daughter was lost. The little girl who used to hug me so tightly when I came home, exhausted from a 16-hour shift, who told me I was her hero, had been replaced by this cold woman who spoke in borrowed, hollow words. "The decision is made, Mom," she mumbled, still not looking up. "Please don't make this any harder than it already is." Harder for whom? I wanted to ask. For her, who was rejecting the purest, most unconditional love she had ever known? Or for me, who was watching my entire world crumble in real time? "All right," I said finally, with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "If that's what you want." I placed the box of cupcakes on the floor by her feet. A few of them tumbled out onto her doormat. I didn't bend down to pick them up. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked toward the elevator with my dignity intact, though inside I felt like I was bleeding out. It was in the elevator, as the lights of the floors blinked on their way down, that I made the decision that would change everything. If my daughter had chosen to cut me out of her life, then I would make my own decisions too. Decisions she would understand very soon. Because actions have consequences. And the following Monday she was going to find out exactly what hers were. 3 months earlier everything had been different. Ashley had arrived at my little house in the suburbs of Raleigh one Sunday in March, her cheeks flushed with excitement, and an engagement ring sparkling on her finger like a promise of a lifetime of happiness. She had thrown herself at me with the tightest hug she'd given me in years, shouting, "Mom, I'm getting married," her voice cracking with joy and tears. I had cried with her, of course. We had danced around my small, familiar kitchen just like we did when she was a little girl, spinning between the old chairs and the table where we had shared 1,000 meals. That day, I made her favorite dish, pot roast with mashed potatoes, and she ate 2 helpings while telling me every detail of Brandon's proposal. It was at the park where we had our first date, she told me, her eyes shining, gesturing with a fork full of potatoes. He got down on one knee by the lake, and there were rose petals everywhere. Mom, I've never seen anything so beautiful. The afternoon light streamed through my kitchen window, the one that needed repairs, but that I always postponed because there were more important things to spend money on. At that moment, with my radiant daughter in front of me, telling me about her future, that golden light made everything seem perfect. Even the cracks in the old linoleum looked romantic, as if they were part of a vintage painting. I want you to be my maid of honor, she had said suddenly, taking my hands across the table. There's no one more important in my life than you. Without you, none of this would have been possible. I had squeezed her hands, feeling the softness of her young skin against the roughness of mine, marked by years of hard work. Of course, sweetheart. It will be the greatest honor of my life. That night after she left, I took out my savings passbook and calculated how much I could contribute to the wedding. It wasn't much, but I could help with the flowers or maybe the dress. I had been saving to replace my mattress, which was over 10 years old and was doing a number on my back. But weddings were more important than comfort. My child was always more important than anything else. Over the next few weeks, Ashley came over religiously every Sunday. She brought bridal magazines, fabric swatches, pictures of cakes she'd found online. My dining room table became our planning headquarters, covered in flower catalogs and lists written in her neat, round handwriting. Look at this church, Mom, she'd say, pointing to a photo in a magazine. Isn't it gorgeous? It has old stained glass windows and smells like jasmine. I would nod, imagining her walking down that aisle in her white dress, radiant and happy. I pictured myself in the front row, in the new dress I had started looking for at discount stores, wiping away tears of joy as I watched her become a wife. But there was something that bothered me, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Brandon had started joining her on some of those Sunday visits. At first, I thought it was normal, that a fiancé would want to get to know his future mother-in-law. But there was something in the way he looked at me, as if he were evaluating me, cataloging me, finding faults. It was subtle at first. Seemingly innocent comments about my house. Don't you think Ashley deserves something a little bigger when she comes to visit? He had said once, looking around my small living room with its old but well-kept furniture. Or when he tasted my food. It's good, but maybe a little less salt. Ashley needs to watch her blood pressure. Ashley would laugh off these comments, dismissing them with a wave of her hand. But I noticed how she stored them away, how she processed them. I saw how she began to look at my house with different eyes, as if she suddenly realized the curtains were faded, that the sofa had a stain I could never completely remove, that my refrigerator made a strange humming noise when the motor kicked in. Brandon's right, she had said one Sunday, almost as if talking to herself. This house is too small for when we have kids. There's no room for grandkids to play. Grandkids. The word had thrilled me so much that I overlooked the comment about the size of my house. Grandchildren, running through these narrow hallways, filling these quiet corners with laughter. I had started to dream about it, about being a grandmother, about having little arms hugging me the way Ashley's once had. But the Sundays began to change. Ashley would arrive later, leave earlier. Her hugs became mechanical, her smiles forced. She stopped asking for my opinion on the wedding plans and started talking about decisions she had already made with Brandon, as if I were just a spectator instead of her confidant. We've already chosen the menu, she announced one Sunday without showing me any options, without asking what I thought. Brandon knows an incredible restaurant that's going to handle everything. I nodded, trying to hide the pang of hurt I felt. I had been imagining cooking something special for her wedding. Maybe my famous chicken pot pies that she had always loved, or the cheesecake I had perfected over the years. But apparently, my food was no longer good enough for the most important event in her life. I should have seen the signs. I should have realized that Brandon wasn't just getting to know his future mother-in-law. He was assessing how easy it would be to pull Ashley away from me. It was in April that I started to notice something was fundamentally wrong. Ashley arrived that Sunday with a strange, almost nervous demeanor. She sat on my sofa without taking off her jacket, as if she didn't plan to stay long. Her eyes avoided mine, and when I asked if she wanted coffee, she said she'd already had some somewhere else. Somewhere else? I asked, puzzled. We always had breakfast together on Sundays. It had been our tradition for years. Yeah, Brandon and I went to that new cafe near his apartment, she replied nonchalantly, but I could hear the tension in her voice. He wanted me to meet his mother, Sylvia. Sylvia. The name stuck in my chest like a splinter. Why was my daughter having breakfast with Brandon's mother instead of me? Why did that woman now have access to the Sunday mornings that had been ours for so long? Oh, was all I managed to say, trying to maintain my composure. And what's she like? For the first time all afternoon, Ashley perked up. Her eyes lit up in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. She's incredible, Mom. So elegant, so sophisticated. She lives in a beautiful apartment in the North End with a view of the water. And you should taste her homemade croissants. Homemade croissants? While I had been baking the same chocolate cupcakes she'd loved since childhood, another woman was impressing her with French pastries. I felt like a peasant being compared to a princess. She gave us incredible advice about the wedding, Ashley continued, now completely absorbed in her story. She says that small, intimate weddings are much more elegant than big celebrations. That it's better to have fewer guests, but of high quality. Fewer high-quality guests. The words floated in the air like an invisible poison. I knew very few people who could be considered high quality, by the standards my daughter was apparently adopting. My friends from the hospital where I worked, the neighbors from our block, the few relatives we had left after so many years of moving and financial struggles. And how many people are you thinking of inviting? I asked, though I already feared the answer. Well, Sylvia says that 50 people is the perfect number. Enough to be special, but not so many that it becomes tacky. Tacky? Another word added to the arsenal of terms that were redefining our world. My daughter, who had grown up at block parties where the whole street celebrated together, was now talking about elegance and tackiness as if she had been born in a mansion. 50 people, I repeated, doing the math in my head. Our family, my friends, the people who had been present in her life as she grew up, we were many more than 50. And how are you going to choose who comes and who doesn't? Ashley shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Well, obviously immediate family will be there. And Brandon's and my closest friends. Sylvia's going to help me make the list. Sylvia was going to help her make the list. Sylvia, who had known my daughter for only a few months, was going to decide which of the people who had watched her grow up deserved to be at her wedding. I, who had raised her alone, apparently had no say in that decision. And what about Mrs. Gable? I asked, referring to our lifelong neighbor, the one who had looked after Ashley when I had to work double shifts. And the girls from the hospital who always ask about you? Mom, we can't invite everyone, Ashley said with a sigh, as if I were a capricious child who didn't understand the complexities of adult life. Sylvia says you have to be selective. That a wedding is a reflection of who we are as a couple. A reflection of who they were as a couple. Apparently, my daughter and Brandon were people who were not reflected in hardworking, simple folks like Mrs. Gable or my colleagues from the hospital. They were reflected in homemade croissants and apartments with a view of the water. That Sunday when Ashley left, I sat on my sofa for hours, staring at the door she had walked out of. The house felt different, smaller, poorer, more inadequate. For the first time in years, I saw my home through critical eyes. The curtains I had sewn myself to save money, the second-hand furniture I had cared for with so much love, the modest decorations I had collected over the years. It all suddenly looked insufficient. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about Sylvia, picturing her in her elegant apartment, planning my daughter's wedding as if it were her own. I imagined her convincing Ashley that I wasn't sophisticated enough for her new life, that my unconditional love was actually a burden, that my presence at her wedding would detract from the event's elegance. And for the first time in 28 years of being a single mother, I felt truly completely alone. I didn't know that this feeling of loneliness was just the beginning. I didn't know that Sylvia and Brandon had begun a systematic campaign to erase me from my daughter's life. I didn't know that every Sunday that passed, every seemingly innocent conversation, was one more piece in the puzzle of my destruction. But I was about to find out. May arrived with a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. Ashley started missing our traditional Sundays. At first, it was a valid excuse. I have to go with Brandon to taste the wedding cake. Then another. Sylvia organized a family lunch and I can't miss it. And then she simply stopped coming without giving any explanation. I would call her and she would reply with short texts. Busy with preparations, Mom. I'll call you later. But later never came. When I finally managed to speak with her on the phone, her voice sounded distant, as if she were reading from a script written by someone else. How are the dress preparations going? I asked one afternoon, trying to hold on to the connection we had always had. Have you decided if you want me to come with you to the final fitting? There was a long, awkward pause. I already went, Mom. Sylvia came with me. She has really good taste for these things. Sylvia again. Sylvia had been there the moment my daughter tried on her wedding dress. One of the most intimate and important moments in any woman's life. I, who had dreamed of that moment since Ashley was a little girl playing princess in my old dresses, had been replaced by a woman who had known my daughter for only a few months. Ashley, I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking, I feel like you're leaving me out of everything. This is your wedding, but it's also one of the most important moments of my life as your mother. It's not about you, Mom, she replied with a coldness that cut me like a knife. It's about Brandon and me, about our future together. But I am your mother, I insisted, a lump forming in my throat. I love you more than my own life. I just want to be part of your happiness. That's exactly the problem, she said, and her voice had taken on a tone I didn't recognize. You've always made everything about your love for me. Suffocating, Mom. It's emotional manipulation. There was that phrase again. Emotional manipulation. The words Brandon had planted in her head like poisonous seeds. My unconditional love, all the sacrifices I had made for her. The sleepless nights nursing her when she was sick, the extra jobs to pay for her education. All of it now had a psychological label that turned it into something toxic. Since when is loving your daughter manipulation? I asked, but the line was already dead. Ashley had hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand for several minutes, listening to the dial tone as if it were the sound of my heart breaking. My daughter had just turned 28 years of a mother's love into a diagnosis from a cheap psychology textbook. That night I decided to do something I had never done. I went online to try and understand what was happening. I typed emotional manipulation into Google and read article after article about toxic parents, conditional love, and emotional dependency. With every paragraph I read, I recognized myself less and less in those descriptions. But I was beginning to understand the arsenal of arguments Brandon had used to convince my daughter that I was the problem. According to these articles, everything I had done out of love could be reinterpreted as manipulation. My financial sacrifices became guilt-tripping. My constant worry transformed into excessive control. My desire to be present in her life was redefined as a violation of boundaries. It was brilliant, really. Brandon had taken the purest, most selfless relationship in Ashley's life and twisted it into something sick. He had managed to make my daughter see the very love that had sustained her entire life as a pathology. 3 days later, I received a call that confirmed my worst fears. It was Mrs. Gable, my lifelong neighbor. Grace, she said, her voice worried. I just saw something that has me very upset. I was at the grocery store and ran into Ashley and that boyfriend of hers. When I said hello, he looked at me like I was a cockroach and told Ashley they were in a hurry. But what hurt me was that Ashley didn't even smile at me, dear. She treated me like she didn't know me. Mrs. Gable had been like a second grandmother to Ashley. She had watched her countless afternoons while I worked. She had taught her how to make pot pies. She had been there for every birthday and every graduation. For Ashley to treat her like a stranger was a betrayal not just to Mrs. Gable, but to her own history. And there's something else, Mrs. Gable continued. I heard him say to her, see? This is why it's better to keep your distance from those people. Those people. Brandon was referring to the people who had raised Ashley, who had loved her, who had been there when he didn't even exist in her life as those people. And my daughter was allowing it. That night I made a decision. I was going to go to Ashley's apartment the next day. I was going to confront this situation head-on, talk to my daughter without Brandon's interference, and remind her of who she was before he arrived to distort her perception of reality. I didn't know that Brandon and Sylvia had anticipated that exact reaction. I didn't know they had prepared Ashley for that moment, filling her head with arguments about healthy boundaries and invasive parents. I didn't know that when I went to find my daughter to save her, I would instead find a stranger who had rehearsed the exact words to destroy me. But I was about to find out. On Wednesday morning, I arrived at Ashley's apartment unannounced. I had decided it was time for an honest face-to-face conversation, without the mediation of phones or texts that could be misinterpreted. In my hands, I carried a folder of photographs from when she was a child, hoping the images of our past together could break the spell Brandon had woven around her. I rang the bell and waited. I heard footsteps on the other side, murmured voices, and then a long silence before the door finally opened. Ashley appeared in the doorway, but she didn't invite me in. She stood blocking the entrance with an expression I had never seen on her face, a mixture of guilt and determination that chilled me to the bone. "Mom, you can't just show up unannounced," she said, her voice holding that rehearsed cadence I had learned to recognize. "Brandon and I were talking about something important." "That's precisely why I came," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I think we need to talk about something important too. About us. About what's happening between you and me." I could see Brandon appear behind her like a protective shadow. He said nothing, but his presence was a statement. He was there to make sure Ashley didn't deviate from the script they had prepared. "Okay," Ashley said after a moment, "but I only have a few minutes. We have to leave soon." We sat in her living room, but the atmosphere was so tense it felt like we were in a lawyer's office instead of my daughter's home. Brandon settled into a chair near us, pretending to read something on his phone, but I knew he was monitoring every word we said. "Ashley," I began, opening the folder of photos. "I want you to see something." I took out a picture of her when she was 7 years old at her first school play. She was dressed as a butterfly, with golden wings I had made from aluminum foil and a lot of patience. In the photo, she was hugging me after the performance, with a smile so big it looked like it was about to pop off her face. "Do you remember this day?" I asked. "I worked all night to make those wings. You told me I was the most creative mom in the world." Ashley looked at the photo, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the girl she used to be. Her eyes softened, her defenses lowered for just a second. But then she glanced at Brandon, as if asking for permission to feel nostalgic, and the wall went back up. "Mom, that was a long time ago," she said, gently pushing the photo back toward me. "People change. I've changed." "Have you changed? Or have you been changed?" I asked, unable to hold back any longer. "Ashley, this isn't you. You weren't cold. You weren't ungrateful. What have they done to you?" Brandon looked up from his phone for the first time. "No one has done anything to her, Grace. Ashley is growing up. She's learning to set healthy boundaries. It's normal for a woman her age to want to become independent from her parents' excessive influence." Excessive influence. Another phrase from the manual they had been using to rewrite our history. Excessive influence? I repeated. "You call raising her alone, working 2 jobs so she could go to school, and selling my jewelry to pay for her college excessive influence?" "Exactly that," Brandon said with a smile that made my skin crawl. "Ashley never asked you for those sacrifices. You made them to create an emotional debt, so she would feel obligated to keep you in her life forever." Emotional debt. A mother's love, turned into a business transaction. Everything I had done out of pure, selfless love now had a calculated price, a hidden agenda. According to Brandon's twisted logic, I hadn't been a loving mother. I had been a calculating manipulator. "Ashley," I said, ignoring Brandon completely, "look me in the eyes and tell me you really believe that. Tell me you believe everything I did for you was to manipulate you." My daughter avoided my gaze, wringing her hands in her lap, a nervous gesture she'd had since she was a child when she knew she was doing something wrong. But when she finally spoke, her words were like knives. "I think without realizing it, yes," she murmured. "I think you've made me feel guilty my whole life for your sacrifices. Every time I wanted to do something on my own, you would remind me of everything you'd done for me." "When?" I asked, my voice cracking. "When did I ever remind you of my sacrifices to make you feel guilty?" Ashley fell silent. She searched her memory for examples of this manipulation she accused me of, But she couldn't find any, because they had never existed. I had never thrown what I did for her in her face. My sacrifices had been silent, proud, and loving. It was Brandon who filled the silence. It doesn't have to be explicit, Grace. Emotional manipulation is often subtle. It's in the way you sigh when she makes independent decisions. The way you make her feel guilty just for having her own life. A sigh. My natural sadness at watching her grow up and pull away had become manipulation. My maternal nostalgia was now a psychological weapon. Brandon had taken every normal, human gesture and twisted it into something monstrous. In that moment I understood that I had lost. Not my daughter, but the battle for her mind. Brandon had been smarter, more systematic, more convincing. He had used the language of modern psychology to make love look like a sickness, to make motherly devotion seem like a pathology. I stood up from the chair with what dignity I had left. All right, I said. If that's what you believe, there's nothing more to talk about. As I walked to the door, Ashley followed me. For a moment I thought she was going to stop me, that she was going to remember who we really were. But when she got close, she just said, "Mom, I hope one day you'll understand that this is for the best." For the best. The final words of a daughter who had learned to justify cruelty with therapy speak. I left that apartment knowing the war was over, but also knowing that while I had lost the battle for my daughter's heart, I still had cards to play. That same afternoon, as I walked back to my house with a shattered heart and the folder of photographs clutched to my chest, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to wait around for my daughter to remember who I was. I wasn't going to beg for a place in her life. If Brandon had managed to convince her I was toxic, then it was time for her to experience life without my supposed toxicity. I got home and took out all the documents I kept in my desk. Insurance policies, the deed to my house, my will, savings account statements. 4 years I had planned my life with Ashley as my sole heir, as the person who would benefit from everything I had built with so much effort. Every dollar I had saved, every investment I had made, every financial decision had been made with the goal of securing a better future for her. But if she no longer considered me a part of her future, then I would no longer consider her a part of mine. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Peterson, a lawyer I knew from the hospital where I worked. His wife had been my shift partner for years, and I knew he was a trustworthy person. "Ed," I said when he answered, "I need to make some changes to my legal documents. Could you see me tomorrow?" "Of course, Grace. Is everything all right?" "Everything is changing," I replied. "And I need to change some things too." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my kitchen, drinking tea and looking at the photographs I had taken to Ashley's apartment. Every image was a reminder of who we had been, of the deep, unbreakable connection that had existed between us before Brandon arrived to poison her mind. There was a photo of Ashley when she was 12, on her middle school graduation day. I was wearing my hospital scrubs because I had to rush from work to get to the ceremony. In the picture, she was hugging me with so much love it looked like she wanted to merge with me. On the back of the photo, in her childish handwriting, she had written, "For the best mom in the world. I love you to the moon and back." To the moon and back. Those had been our special words, our way of telling each other how much we loved each other. How had it gone from that to, "Don't come to my wedding"? The next morning, I arrived early at Mr. Peterson's office. I had a clear list of what I wanted to change. My will, my life insurance policies, the bank accounts where Ashley was listed as the beneficiary. Everything. "Are you sure about this, Grace?" Mr. Peterson asked as he reviewed my requests. "These are permanent changes. Once we modify these documents, Ashley will no longer have any legal claim to your assets." "Completely sure," I replied. "My daughter has decided I'm toxic to her life. Well, then my money must be toxic too." Mr. Peterson looked at me with understanding. He had seen many cases of families torn apart by pop psychology manipulation and recognized the patterns. "And who do you want to name as your new beneficiary?" I had thought about it all night. The Children's Foundation at the hospital where I work. And Mrs. Gable, my neighbor. She's been more of a family to me in recent months than my own daughter. I signed each document with a steady hand. Each signature was an act of liberation, a declaration of emotional independence. If Ashley wanted a life without my influence, she would get it completely. Without my presence, without my emotional support, and without my inheritance. But there was one more thing I needed to do. That afternoon, I went to the bank and withdrew all the money I had been saving to contribute to Ashley's wedding. It was 5 years of sacrifices, of doing without, of picking up extra shifts. Money I had saved dollar by dollar, thinking of making my daughter happy on the most important day of her life. With that money I bought a plane ticket to Spain. I had dreamed for years of seeing the land of my grandparents, but I had always postponed the trip because there were more important things to spend the money on. There had always been something Ashley needed, some way to invest in her future instead of my own. But not anymore. If she was going to start her married life without drama or toxicity, then I was going to start a new chapter of my life too. A chapter where my decisions were my own, where my money was for my dreams, where I didn't have to justify every dollar spent on my own happiness. I booked the flight for the Monday after her wedding. It would be my gift to myself. While she was celebrating her new life without me, I would be starting mine without her. That night, I received a call from Ashley. My heart sped up, thinking maybe she'd had a change of heart, that maybe she wanted to apologize. But when I answered, her voice was cold and practical. "Mom, I need you to confirm the address of the church where you were baptized. Brandon wants us to have all the religious documentation complete for the ceremony." Religious documentation? My daughter was asking me for information for her wedding as if I were a clerk's office, not her mother. As if my only value was providing data to fill out forms. "Why do you need that information?" I asked. "It's a requirement for the church where we're getting married. They need the baptismal certificate and some other documents." "Ashley," I said slowly, "are you asking me to help you with the paperwork for a wedding I'm not invited to?" There was a long silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was laced with annoyance. "Mom, please don't be dramatic. It's just information. I need it. Don't be dramatic." My feelings had been reduced to unnecessary drama. My maternal pain was just an inconvenient exaggeration. "I don't have that information on hand," I lied. "You'll have to look for it yourself." I hung up before she could reply. It was the first time in 28 years I had denied my daughter anything, and it felt like the first true act of freedom of my adult life. On the Saturday of her wedding, while she was preparing for the most important day of her life without me, I would be packing for the most important trip of mine. On the Friday before the wedding, while Ashley was surely at her bachelorette party, surrounded by the sophisticated friends Brandon had approved of, I was in my kitchen packing up the last memories of a life I was leaving behind. I had decided to sell the house. It was too big for a woman alone, and every corner reminded me of the daughter I had lost long before she banned me from her wedding. Mrs. Gable came over to help me pack. Her wrinkled hands touched each object with the tenderness of someone who understands the weight of memories. When we found the shoebox full of letters Ashley had written to me as a child, we both fell silent. "Read one," Mrs. Gable asked me, sitting beside me on the living room floor. I pulled one out at random. It was from when Ashley was 10 years old, written on notebook paper in purple pencil. "Dear Mommy," it said in her round, childish handwriting. "Thank you for working so hard so I can have everything I need. When I grow up, I'm going to take care of you like you take care of me. I'm going to buy you a big house with a garden, and we'll live together forever. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Mrs. Gable squeezed my hand as tears rolled down my cheeks. "That little girl is still in there somewhere," she said. "No," I replied, putting the letter back in the box. "That little girl died the day she told me not to come to her wedding. And I can't keep crying for someone who no longer exists." That afternoon the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I saw a man I didn't know. He was young, maybe Ashley's age, in a formal suit with an uncomfortable smile. "Mrs. Callahan?" he asked. "I'm Mark, Brandon's cousin. I'm here on behalf of Ashley." My heart stopped for a moment. Had she had a change of heart? Had she sent this man to invite me to the wedding after all? "Ashley wanted me to give you this," he said, handing me a white envelope, "and to tell you that she hopes you understand." I took the envelope with shaking hands. Mark left quickly, as if wanting to flee the scene of a crime. I closed the door and stood in the entryway, looking at my name written in Ashley's elegant handwriting on the front of the envelope. Inside was a 2-page letter and something else, a photograph. It was the same photo I had taken to her apartment, The one of her at 7, dressed as a butterfly. But now it had something written on the back in blue ink. Thank you for everything you did. But I'm not that little girl anymore. I read the letter, my heart breaking with every word. Ashley had written a formal, cold farewell, full of the psychological phrases Brandon had taught her. She talked about closing chapters, codependent relationships, and unhealthy love. She ended by telling me she hoped that one day I could heal and find my own happiness without being emotionally dependent on her. Emotionally dependent on her. My motherly love had been diagnosed as a disease that needed a cure. That night, as I burned the letter in my utility sink, I made my final decision. I wouldn't just go to Spain after her wedding. I would move there. Permanently. I had done some research over the past few weeks and had found a small town in Asturias where I could buy a house with the money from selling mine. A place where no one knew my story. Where I could start over. Saturday dawned bright and sunny. Perfect weather for a wedding, I thought ironically as I drank my morning coffee. Ashley would be waking up in her apartment, maybe with butterflies in her stomach, excited for the day she had dreamed of since she was a little girl. Except that dream no longer included me. At 10 a.m., which was exactly when the ceremony was supposed to begin, I was sitting in Mrs. Gable's garden, helping her plant tomatoes. I had decided not to be in my house during the wedding. I didn't want to risk nostalgia making me do something foolish, like showing up at the church uninvited. Doesn't it hurt doing this right now? Mrs. Gable asked as we worked the soil. It hurts to breathe, I admitted. But the pain won't change what's happening. At least here I'm doing something useful. At 11:30, while Ashley was probably saying I do to Brandon, I was watering the plants with tears I couldn't hold back. But they weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears of grief. I was burying the daughter I had known and loved, and saying goodbye to the mother I had been for 28 years. That afternoon, while the wedding reception was surely in full swing, I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. The ceremony was beautiful. Ashley looked radiant. Sylvia handled everything perfectly. It was clearly from someone who knew I hadn't been there. Someone who wanted to make sure I knew my absence hadn't ruined anything. That Sylvia had perfectly filled my place as the mother figure on the most important day of my daughter's life. I deleted the message without replying, but a strange cold smile formed on my face. Because whoever sent that message didn't know that on Monday morning, Ashley was going to discover that decisions have consequences. That rejecting a mother doesn't just mean losing her presence at a wedding. It means losing everything that mother had built for her daughter's future. On Sunday I packed my last suitcase. Early Monday I would leave for Spain. But first I had an appointment at the bank and at Mr. Peterson's office. It was time for my daughter to learn that a mother's love is not infinite when it is not returned. Monday dawned gray and overcast, as if the sky knew it was a day of reckoning. I got up at 5 a.m., dressed in my best navy blue suit, and headed to the bank as soon as it opened. I had 3 appointments scheduled before my afternoon flight. The bank, Mr. Peterson's office, and one last stop that Ashley would never see coming. At the bank, the manager who had served me for years looked at me with a concerned expression as she processed the transfers I had requested. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Callahan? It's a considerable amount of money. Completely sure, I replied, signing each document with a steady hand. I want everything transferred today. I was closing every account Ashley had access to, including the joint savings account we had opened when she turned 18. An account that held not only my savings but also the money I had inherited when my own mother died 3 years ago. Money I had kept untouched, saving it for Ashley's future, for her house, for her children, for any emergencies that might arise in her married life. But a daughter who considers her mother toxic clearly doesn't need that mother's toxic money. My second stop was Mr. Peterson's office. He had all the final documents ready. The new will, the changes to the insurance policies, the transfer of the house's deed to the real estate agency that would handle the sale in my absence. The papers for the house are in order, Mr. Peterson informed me. The agency has full authorization to manage the sale. When you get back from Spain, the money will be deposited into your new account. And what if I don't come back? I asked. What if I decide to stay there permanently? Mr. Peterson looked at me with a mixture of admiration and sadness. Then you'll truly be starting a new life. Exactly. My third stop was the most important. I went to the flower shop where Ashley had worked during her summer breaks in college. The owner, Diane, knew me well and knew the whole story of what had happened. Diane, I said, I need you to do a very special favor for me. Anything you need, Grace. I want you to send a flower arrangement to Ashley this afternoon. White roses, her favorite. With a card that says, "Congratulations on your marriage. May you have the independent life you so desired. With love, Mom." Diane frowned. Are you sure about that message? Completely. And Diane, after today, if Ashley comes in asking for me or for my address, you don't know anything. Understood, she nodded, though I could see the worry in her eyes. At 2 p.m. I was at the airport waiting for my flight to Madrid. My heart was calm for the first time in months. It wasn't happiness, but it was peace. The peace that comes when you finally stop fighting the inevitable. My phone rang as they were announcing the boarding for my flight. It was an unknown number, but I had a feeling who it was before I answered. Mom. Ashley's voice sounded confused, almost panicked. Where are you? I went to the bank and they told me you closed all the accounts. I don't understand what's happening. Hello, Ashley, I replied calmly. How was the honeymoon? The honeymoon? Mom, we didn't go on a honeymoon. We were going to use the money from the savings account for the trip, but when Brandon went to the bank this morning, they told him the account was closed. What did you do? There it was. The first moment my daughter understood that actions have consequences. That excluding a mother from your life also means excluding everything that mother had built for you. I did exactly what you asked me to, I said as I walked toward the boarding gate. I removed myself from your life. Completely. What are you talking about? I never asked you to close the accounts. Not in those words, I admitted. But you told me you didn't need me anymore, that I was toxic to your life. Well, my money must be toxic too. There was a long silence. I could hear voices in the background, probably Brandon demanding to know what was happening. Mom, this is ridiculous, she finally said. But her voice had lost the calculated coldness of the past few weeks. Now she sounded like the scared little girl she used to be when she got lost in the grocery store. You can't do this. I can and I did, I replied. For 28 years I made every decision thinking of you. Every dollar I saved, every investment I made, every sacrifice I accepted. It was all for your future. But you decided that future didn't include me. So I decided my money doesn't include you either. Where is the inheritance money from Grandma? She asked, and for the first time, I could hear real raw panic in her voice. Donated to the Children's Foundation at the hospital where I work. To children who actually need help, who actually appreciate it when someone takes care of them. They announced the final call for my flight. It was time to go. Ashley, I said, I wish you all the happiness in the world with Brandon and Sylvia. May you have the sophisticated and elegant life you wanted, without the toxicity of a working-class mother who embarrassed you. But let it be a life you build yourselves alone without my help. Mom, wait, she shouted, but I had already hung up. I turned off my phone and boarded the plane. As we took off and I watched the city shrink below us, I didn't feel sadness. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The exhilarating freedom of owning my own life. Somewhere in that city, Ashley was probably crying, understanding for the first time the true cost of choosing Brandon's manipulation over her mother's unconditional love. But it was too late for tears. 6 months later, I was sitting at a small cafe in my village in Asturias, reading a book under the golden Spanish afternoon sun, when my phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. I had changed my number 3 times over these months, but somehow, Ashley always managed to find me. Mom, please, I need to talk to you. Terrible things have happened. Brandon left me. Sylvia turned out to be a liar. I lost my job. I have no one. Please answer me. I read the message twice, then deleted it without replying. It wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. Over the past 6 months I had received dozens of similar messages. At first, they had been furious, full of accusations about how I had sabotaged her marriage by withdrawing the money. Then they had been pleading, promising we could fix things if I came back. Then they had been manipulative, using my maternal guilt to try to force me to rescue her one more time. But that maternal guilt no longer existed. I had buried it the day I got on that plane. My new life in Ribadizela was simple and beautiful. I had bought a small stone cottage with a view of the sea, with a little garden where I grew tomatoes and herbs. I worked part-time at the local clinic, caring for the town's elderly, who treated me with the respect and affection my own daughter had never known how to value. Dona Esperanza, my 75-year-old neighbor, had adopted me as the daughter she never had. Every afternoon we had tea on her terrace, and she would tell me stories about the village, about the families who had lived here for generations, about the children who had left for the city and never returned. "Don't you miss your old life?" she had asked me once. "I miss the daughter I thought I had," I had replied. "But I don't miss the pain of loving someone who didn't love me back." That afternoon, after deleting Ashley's message, I went for a walk on the beach as I did every evening. The Cantabrian Sea was especially beautiful, with gentle waves lapping at the golden sand. On the horizon, the sun was beginning to paint the sky orange, promising a spectacular sunset. It was there, as I walked barefoot along the shore, that I remembered something I had forgotten during months of pain. What it felt like to be happy. Not the conditional happiness I had lived for years, the joy that depended on whether Ashley called, whether she needed me, whether she included me in her plans, but a happiness of my own, independent, born from the simple pleasure of being alive, of breathing the salt air, of feeling the sand between my toes. That night, as I prepared a simple dinner for myself, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Gable from back home. "Grace, I have news," she said without preamble. "Ashley came by looking for your address. She's desperate. It seems that Brandon left her for a younger woman, and Sylvia disappeared once the money ran out. She's living in a tiny apartment, working at a call center." I listened to the information without feeling anything. Not satisfaction at the poetic justice, nor pain at her suffering. "Are you going to contact her?" Mrs. Gable asked. "No," I replied. "I am no longer the mother who runs to rescue her daughter every time she makes a mistake. That woman died the day she was banned from a wedding. And what if she's really learned her lesson? What if she now values what she lost? Then let her learn to live with the consequences of her decisions," I said, with a calmness that surprised even me. "The way I learned to." I hung up and finished my dinner in silence. Afterward, I went out to the garden and sat in the wicker chair I had bought at the local market. The stars were beginning to appear in the Asturian sky, brighter and clearer than I had ever seen them in the city. I thought about the woman I had been for 28 years. A woman who had lived for someone else, who had measured her worth by how needed she was by her daughter, who had confused love with constant sacrifice. That woman had died of sadness and disillusionment in an apartment where she was rejected. But from her ashes, this new version of me had been born. A woman who ate breakfast when she was hungry, who read books she enjoyed, who bought flowers for her own house, who had deep conversations with friends who valued her. A woman who had learned that self-love isn't selfishness, but survival. My phone vibrated one last time. Another message from Ashley. "Mom, I know you're reading this. I just want you to know that I get it now. I get everything. Forgive you." I laughed out loud, breaking the silence of the night. She forgave me. The daughter who had expelled me from her life, who had chosen strangers over me, who had turned my love into a pathology, was now forgiving me. I deleted the message and turned off the phone. Tomorrow would be another beautiful day in my new life. A day that belonged completely to me, without the golden chains of unrequited love. Ashley had chosen to learn life's lessons late. I had chosen to learn the lessons of freedom early. And for the first time in decades, when I looked toward the future, I didn't see my daughter's face. I saw my own smiling. I had won something far more valuable than a wedding invitation or a hollow forgiveness. I had won my own life back. And I would never ever give it away again.